Warning. The following information is not financial advice, and the host is certainly not a financial expert.
Hello, welcome to episode 23 of the Bitcoin Game. I'm Rob Mitchell. I recently attended Keynote 2015, the second Bitcoin-related conference held in Los Angeles this year. Keynote 2015 included a wide mix of speakers, including some from far outside the realm of Bitcoin. There was even a speaker touting advances in good old-fashioned credit card technology. The biggest message I took from the event was simply how much everyone is taking notice of blockchain technology, if not Bitcoin itself. I'm starting to have a sense that all companies of a certain size or leaning are deploying entire departments to research blockchain technology. It makes me wonder if we're entering a stage where the majority of blockchain developers will soon be working for multinational corporations. Somehow it came up while talking on the Let's Talk Bitcoin Slack that I'm perhaps seen as the most mainstream of the hosts on the network, and this episode might help cement me into that position. I decided to experiment with buying Bitcoin a new way. I bought shares of the Bitcoin Investment Trust. It's the first and perhaps only way for a U.S. citizen to add an investment in Bitcoin to a retirement account. You can buy this fund with any major online brokerage account, just like buying a stock or ETF. Now, of course, you could argue that one doesn't actually own Bitcoin when you're buying these shares, since a third party holds the private keys, and there are inherent risks to the platform. Just ask Patrick Byrne. But the fund and this episode could be more skewed slightly toward people interested in investing in Bitcoin for the long term, using an investment platform they're already familiar with, while shielding themselves from the learning curve still necessary to hold Bitcoin securely. I reached out to Grayscale, the company responsible for the Bitcoin Investment Trust, to find out more. I got a response from Michael Sonnenshein, the Director of Sales and Business Development for Grayscale. And here's our conversation. Hi, Michael. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, well, thank you. Before we get into it, I just wanted to find out a little bit about your past.
Sure. So I am a former banker. Spent all of my career before getting into the Bitcoin space on Wall Street, and spent time at Bank of America, Barclays, and most recently JP Morgan, and have been working in the Bitcoin digital currency space for a little bit over a year and a half, and haven't looked back since I made the move.
So what about Bitcoin first grabbed your attention?
I actually wasn't even necessarily seeking a role in the Bitcoin space when I decided to join the team here. What I was actually seeking was a smaller institution where I would have a lot more influence on what we were and weren't doing. And that search led me to a whole host of different types of, hedge funds, family offices, whatever it may be. Bitcoin was on my radar at the time, sitting within a big bank like JP Morgan and being actively involved in the markets and across various types of investment instruments. I think Bitcoin would come up from time to time on CNBC. There'd be a news flash and maybe a chart of what the Bitcoin price was doing on a given day, but it wasn't necessarily something that I had taken very seriously or looked into all that much. And as I was interviewing and looking for new opportunities, I connected with the founder of our company, Barry Silbert. Both he and I went to the same school as undergrads and kind of had this instant connection. Then when we interviewed, and I guess the rest is kind of history.
Aside from going to the same school, I'm just curious what qualities you had,
Sure.
You think that he was interested to hire you?
So I think bringing someone on like myself whose really only experience was in regulated environments, with pretty decent and diversified knowledge of different types of financial products, having a really good understanding of the different types of investors out there, and the ways that different products come to market, and kind of what products and investment themes are in and out of vogue at a given time, was kind of a natural fit to come here, which is more of a startup culture. It is still a regulated environment, but nonetheless is not a large, big bank with all kinds of crazy compliance and overhead. And it was a really natural fit to kind of bring that background, bring that experience into here. And at the same time, I think Barry's enthusiasm for Bitcoin, for the space, how many developments were going on, how many companies were getting funding, how much attention, the venture capital community and a lot of, legacy businesses that stand to be disrupted or displaced by Bitcoin digital currency were taking place at the time, I think really had a profound impact on me and, caused me to say if there was ever a time to kind of take a chance and see what this industry had to offer and what this would develop into, now would be the time. And that's kind of why I went forward with it.
So how long did it take for you to be pretty new to Bitcoin to being just passionate about it? I'll tell you, I've looked at your Twitter and you just seem like a passionate Bitcoin person to me.
Yeah, so that is most definitely true. I'm very passionate. I would say that it took me a couple of weeks to really dive deeply into Bitcoin, to really understand the underlying, blockchain technology and how many different use cases and applications there were for it. I think my personal aha moment was when I really started to dig into how much Bitcoin can really transform the lives of, I guess, what I would characterize as maybe nearly half of the world's adult population. And by that, I mean, I guess the most recent, World Bank statistics say that about half the world's adult population really don't have any access to financial services. So they really have no ability to, save money, pass it on to future generations, have the ability to finance their educations or finance businesses as entrepreneurs, et cetera. And what these individuals do have, really no matter where their geography is they do have cell phones. Even if they're the most basic of cell phones, having that connectivity is really the only thing and the foundation that's necessary to get involved with Bitcoin. And I think as I started to think about these people who could easily start getting involved with financial services through a mechanism like Bitcoin, I really started to understand what the real potential was here. And as I started to hear whispers and commentary from people saying, oh, Bitcoin could be bigger than the internet, or, oh, Bitcoin could change the world, I really started to kind of dive even deeper into what was happening in the space. And that's really, I think, how I started to get really passionate about it. I think that at least in the very, very near term, Bitcoin will not be doing many things that will be life-changing, which I think is a really important kind of set of words to hone in on, at least in the developed world in the near term. In the developing world, I think Bitcoin will have profound consequences and impacts in the near term. And I think it'll follow a similar penetration rate in terms of who is using it and who's utilizing it, the way mobile phones took off, far faster in the developing world than they did in the developed world, just because there was never the infrastructure or capital to put landlines in place. And I think along those same lines, Bitcoin will follow that same trajectory. And I think that, even over just the last year and a half being involved in the space as I am, professionally, personally, et cetera, I think that the press in general has not done the best job of covering Bitcoin. For most readers out there, this is a very nascent technology that is extraordinarily different than maybe any other thing that has ever come along. And rather than taking the time and the wherewithal to demystify and explain what Bitcoin actually is and the ways that it's being used and the different use cases that different companies who are getting investment are looking to utilize it, I think the press has done what for them is a far easier task, which is to cover stories around bad actors and people doing nefarious things with Bitcoin and digital currency. And not to say that these are not newsworthy events, but they're by no means at all conveying to the readership how much potential is actually here. And I think that we are starting to see that change, as an unprecedented amount of venture capital funding flows into the space, and we continue to see this gigantic movement of human capital, people leaving credit card companies, people leaving internet companies, people leaving banks, et cetera, to join Bitcoin-related companies, blockchain-related companies.
I feel like I could just rap with you about Bitcoin topics, but let's get a little bit to your actual business. So I'm a little confused. Can you explain what Grayscale is versus Second Market?
So Grayscale and our sister companies are all relatively recently formed. These were all lines of businesses that were originally housed under Second Market. However, Second Market today has an entirely distinct business that has nothing to do with Bitcoin and digital currency whatsoever. In fact, Second Market is really a software business and is heavily involved in capital raising and tendering for private companies and private funds. To kind of alleviate any kind of brand confusion, all of our digital currency related initiatives were relatively recently repackaged and given new names. So at the highest level, we have formed a company called Digital Currency Group, where our founder, Barry Silbert, sits as CEO. Digital Currency Group has 3 buckets underneath it at its inception. The first of those buckets is a venture capital portfolio. So DCG as a company has made investments in over 50 different Bitcoin blockchain related companies all over the world, and will look to continue to reinvest in many of those companies and continue to identify other companies to see or invest in subsequent rounds as they grow and have capital needs.
Do you have any sense if companies that are actually working in a way related to the actual Bitcoin blockchain versus companies trying to develop other blockchains? Is there a leaning toward one or the other? Or?
I'd say that most companies are building products and services around Bitcoin and the blockchain that's associated with it. There are companies in the portfolio, for example, companies like Blockstream, which are working on a concept called side chains.
To me, they classify as a Bitcoin company.
Sure.
As opposed to, I'm just being more and more exposed to all these private blockchain ideas and stuff like that. So you guys are really Bitcoin.
Primarily. And I'd say, it's also just worth noting there are, I think at last count, in excess of 500 different digital currencies out there. Bitcoin is far and away the most adopted, the most used, has the largest market cap, has the most investment being poured into it, et cetera. But there are all kinds of other digital currencies out there that people are developing, bringing to market, et cetera.
So I took you off scale. You were talking about DCG and then 2 other.
The other 2 buckets under the DCG company umbrella, rather, I should say, are 2 wholly owned subsidiaries. The first wholly owned subsidiary is a company called Genesis. Genesis is our trading business. So they are the largest over-the-counter Bitcoin trading desk globally and trade with everyone from Bitcoin miners to hedge funds, large holders, you name it. They obviously have relationships with various Bitcoin exchanges as well, but their primary target audience are people looking to trade large blocks of Bitcoin on an over-the-counter basis. The other wholly owned subsidiary of Digital Currency Group is the part of the organization where I sit, which is called Grayscale. Grayscale is a digital currency focused asset management business. So if you think about Grayscale as a product creator / sponsor, our first product that we have out in the market is called the Bitcoin Investment Trust. And we would, of course, love to think about, incubate, seed, start, bring to market other financial products that, kind of bridge that gap between people looking to make investments in digital currency and having a mechanism by which to do it. The Bitcoin Investment Trust is our product that's been out since September of 2013, and it is a long-only Bitcoin fund. So if you think about comparable products, one that comes to mind is the Spider Gold GLD ETF, where rather than buying physical gold and finding a place to store it and vault it, et cetera, many people wanting gold exposure will actually go out to the open market and buy shares of GLD, which will serve as a proxy for gold exposure because the trust holds gold and derives its value from the price of gold. Along those same lines, the Bitcoin Investment Trust is a open-ended vehicle that passively holds Bitcoin and derives its value from the price of Bitcoin. So we give investors really 2 options for getting involved with the Bitcoin Investment Trust. On the one hand, if you are an accredited investor, you are eligible to purchase shares of the fund on a daily basis at the 4 o'clock NAV price. The 4 o'clock NAV price is based around an index that takes into account the global Bitcoin exchanges and takes a trailing 24-hour volume-weighted average of those exchanges to calculate the 4 o'clock price. So when investors come into the fund, as accredited investors, they're purchasing what are unregistered restricted shares, which are subject to a 1-year holding period. The shares, after being held for 1 year, are eligible for resale in the public markets under Rule 144. So if you're an existing investor who came in and is an accredited investor, after you've held your shares for a year, you can actually take your shares, deposit them into an investment account of your choice, and sell them like you would other, liquid stocks, bonds, etc. And the public ticker symbol for that is GBTC, Gary Boy Tomcat. Alternatively, if you're not an accredited investor, or even if you are, you can go to the public markets and buy shares of GBTC on any given day that the public markets are open. Functionally, the shares are exactly the same. They represent the same amount of underlying Bitcoin. However, the pricing between the two is disparate. So if you are a purchaser of restricted shares of the fund at NAV, as you hold them, your shares are marked again to a daily 4 o'clock NAV price reflecting the Bitcoin market price. Alternatively, shares of GBTC in the public market, we obviously have no control as to how those shares trade, and they're subject to market forces of buying and selling. So since the shares debuted on the public markets in May of this year, the shares have remained in the public markets at a relatively steep premium to that NAV price. And how high that premium is or how long it persists for is, again, another force that we're not able to control, and not sure how long either of those will last.
Do you have an idea like what it is today, say, the spread between buying it each way?
Sure. I can take a look on the Grayscale site if you just give me a second. So off of today's market closing price, August 12th, in the public markets, shares of GBTC, the last trade was done at $29.51. Conversely, the NAV price for the shares that are still held in restricted form was $25.89.
In theory, might someone want to speculate just that they can get it at the lower rate in a year, it'll still be a lower rate?
Yeah. So, for example, if you had invested in the fund a year ago, or a little over a year ago today, if you were still holding your shares in restricted form, you would be marked to that $25.89 price. However, if you were to take your shares and they were, deemed freely tradable past that 1 year mark and deposit them into your brokerage account, they would be marked to a $29.51 price. So there is that premium out there, which may or may not incentivize you to sell the shares publicly, and then perhaps make a new investment or whatever other strategy you may think of.
So I guess there might be some people listening who qualify as accredited investors. I guess not a huge percentage. Is there a minimum investment also you have to do going through that way?
Yeah, so accredited investors who purchase unregistered restricted shares, the minimum investment is $25,000. Something that we've actually seen a good amount of our investor base look to do as they make their investments is to use tax advantage funds to make this investment. And by that, I mean making the investment through either IRAs or Roth IRAs or different types of retirement accounts. I think for many people, they recognize that it is very early days for Bitcoin and for investing in the space. And if they really believe that Bitcoin is to have, the opportunity to fulfill its potential, this is not going to be a quick trade for them. This is going to be something that they would look at probably on a more of a medium to long-term basis. And with that being said, that often, is the reason why a structure like ours, where they're subject to a 1 year hold period, is not something that prohibits them from investing. And for another, if they're really not sure over, how long a time horizon they want to hold this, or what potential return an investment like this might have if Bitcoin is to really fulfill its promise, they'd like to do it through a tax efficient manner. So we actually work with a variety of self-directed IRA custodians through which many of these investors have made that investment. And I think for another, to the best of my knowledge, there really is no such thing as a Bitcoin IRA wallet at any of the given companies that provide walleting or Bitcoin buying and selling. So this is really one of the only ways for people to gain exposure through tax efficient accounts into Bitcoin.
And You guys do have a annual management fee?
Correct. So the fund charges a 2% annual fee, which is really to cover administration and safekeeping of the fund. In comparison to other products out there, be them the GLD, which we referenced before, or even things on the other end of the spectrum, like an actively managed stock strategy, a 2% annual fee sounds kind of high. But when you kind of compare it to what the cost would be to purchase Bitcoin outright, get into it, get out of it, plus whatever vaulting, safekeeping, et cetera, other measures people may take to hold the underlying on their own, you're going to pay at least 1% plus a spread getting in and getting out of Bitcoin. So the 2% fee is not something that usually prohibits people from investing either.
Today's magic word is invest. INVEST. Use the magic word and claim your share of this week's listener reward of LT Bitcoin on letstalkbitcoin.com. You have 1 week from this episode's release to claim the magic word. To everyone who participates in the Let's Talk Bitcoin Listener Rewards program, congratulations for being on the cutting edge of blockchain-based media. How does an investor feel safe that you're holding their Bitcoin in a very safe manner?
We have become highly adept at storing Bitcoin on our own. Again, when we started the fund in late 2013, there were no companies in the ecosystem like Zappo, who we've just recently appointed as custodian for the fund. So we made significant investment on our part to meaningfully store Bitcoin in a way that is safe and secure, and had the whole process overseen by a financial operations principal, et cetera. Now that we've transitioned the Bitcoin into a custodian like Zappo, they have what we believe to be the right technology in place to do this in a safe and secure manner, not to mention that Zappo deposits are insured.
And what made you decide to make that change?
Well, one of the changes was recent legislation, one being the BIT license here in New York, which had implications for companies that were dealing in Bitcoin and dealing in Bitcoin on behalf of customers and other investors and whatnot. So it was actually an initiative on our end that we wanted to undertake anyway, adding yet another what we believe to be a great service provider around the fund, but also just became even more timely with the BIT license coming through.
How is that directly affected by BIT license? I'm not sure why I'm saying that would be a better way for you, regulation.
Because Zappo would be a company that would be applying for a BIT license in the state of New York.
Okay.
Whereas Grayscale, as the sponsor of the fund, is not actually holding Bitcoin on behalf of other individuals or investors.
So you can start a fund, yet not be the person who holds the asset.
Well, that's no different than, somebody who starts a gold fund and, enlists Brinks or some other company to vault their gold bullion somewhere, or whatever custodian it may be. And the same is true of stocks and bonds and other strategies like that, where those types of funds enlist the help of a Pershing or a Bank of New York Mellon, et cetera, as custodian for their funds as well. So it actually, we're more often than not, I would think, following the natural course that most funds undertake, which is to outsource custodianship. And we've, just recently accomplished that.
Well, that's certainly something I know nothing about. Say with BIT license or other regulations, like where do you guys fit in that? I mean, you're not custodians, so that avoids a lot. What other like Bitcoin specific or often talked about regulations that affect Bitcoin companies do you guys have to dance around?
I think something that many Bitcoin companies face is around having banking relationships. And I think thus far we've been successful on that front. I think that in general, our feelings around regulation are largely positive and accommodative. Like all other industries, be it healthcare, even financial services, whatever it may be, all these industries exist and are successful in their own right because of regulation. And if Bitcoin is to succeed, and again, I can't stress enough how early days it is for Bitcoin, it's not going to succeed in a black hole. It's going to succeed within a framework and certain parameters that allow it to succeed. So I think regulation is actually a positive development for the space, and we'll see how the regulatory landscape continues to firm up. I know that there are 10 plus states that have pending legislation around digital currency. So I think the next couple of months will be quite telling.
How do you think it was you guys were able to secure a banking relationship when so many big companies and players with a financial history seem like they haven't been able to do it at times?
Between our various entities that are housed here, we are a New York-based regulated broker-dealer with a 10-plus year track record, et cetera. So I think as banks look to take us on as customers, we would be one of the most, if not the most, credible Bitcoin entities out there looking to do business with them.
That sounds good.
Sure.
So how does it work technically with holding and when people buy some of the fund? I mean, you guys literally go out and buy Bitcoin the same day someone buys some of the fund, or how does that work?
If you were to come into the fund today and make your $25,000 investment after filling out all of our subscription documents, going through our KYC, AML procedures, et cetera, the last step of your investment process would actually be to wire in as much money as you were looking to commit to the fund. When those funds come in, our trading arm, Genesis, actually serves as the authorized participant for the Bitcoin Investment Trust. So if you were to make a $25,000 investment, then Genesis, acting as the authorized participant, would actually need to go out and source as much Bitcoin for as much money as you were looking to commit to the fund. By purchasing that Bitcoin, the fund would then grow by as much Bitcoin as, to match your investment dollars. So on that day, the fund would grow by, for example, $25,000 worth of Bitcoin. In return, our transfer agent, Continental, would be providing to you a statement demonstrating the number of shares that you own in the fund, and those shares would be held in a book entry form. And I guess also on that note, it would be important to highlight that it is approximately a 10-to-1 ratio of 10 shares of the fund per Bitcoin. So that would give you a sense of, how many shares you would own and how you'd be able to keep track of it.
Okay. So I didn't realize that when I just bought my small amount was that over the counter? No. What is it called the way I bought?
You bought the shares on the public markets, and the shares are listed through OTCQX, which is the platform they trade on.
If someone buys it through you guys, it does not affect the price of the publicly traded.
Correct. The only time when the public markets, when GBTC is affected, is if an existing shareholder is electing to sell shares that are, again, past that 1 year mark and are deemed freely tradable, and or investors are buying and selling shares just freely in the secondary market.
So when I bought some, I was just buying GBTC from someone else selling. It wasn't from you guys in any way.
Correct. We have no involvement in, again, the trading forces on a given day on how GBTC trades.
Now, would you call this an exchange-traded fund?
It actually cannot be called an exchange-traded fund because OTCQX is actually a public marketplace, not a public exchange. If it were to be called an ETF, the shares would be traded on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange or something of that effect and would actually be registered shares.
Did we just call this a fund?
Yes. Exactly.
So I will say when I first started looking at the graph of the price of GBTC and saw no correlation to graphs of the price of Bitcoin, I was, I guess, just trying to even figure out, what to expect. When would you expect the price of the fund to more closely track the price of Bitcoin?
It's hard to say. Again, we really don't have a control over the fact that GBTC trades at a premium in the public markets to the Bitcoin price or even the NAV price of the restricted shares. What I can tell you is, I guess, a couple of different theories around why it may be trading at a premium as opposed to, perfectly or almost perfectly mimicking the Bitcoin spot price. I think number one, there is some scarcity value here. So again, the number of shares eligible to be bought and sold on a given day in GBTC is often dependent on existing shareholders electing to sell or people who have bought in the secondary market or who are trading in the secondary market. So there is some scarcity value. It's not like there's an unlimited quantity of shares out there. And I think that in and of itself is causing the market to dictate a premium for the shares. I think a second reason is novelty. So again, even someone like yourself who's looking to make an investment in Bitcoin, you really don't have many options other than buying Bitcoin outright in terms of funds or places to park capital to get invested in the space. So being this first and only publicly traded Bitcoin investment vehicle, there are people who I think are trying to snatch up these shares because of the novelty factor and wanting to get involved with it early, and don't really care or aren't as price sensitive because they have, again, a medium to long-term outlook for this investment. And, I think we'll see how this unfolds, how long the premium pricing persists, or how wide that premium is. But at the moment, those are pretty much the forces that we can kind of identify that are causing it to trade at a premium. So when it will, come down further to par is very hard to predict.
How much correlation is there between fund movement and the price of Bitcoin?
Between fund movement and the price of Bitcoin?
Oh, I'm sorry. The price of the fund, the trading price of the fund and Bitcoin. When Bitcoin goes up 10, 20%, do you see some sign of that in the fund?
So the NAV price, the shares that are still restricted, the correlation is going to be nearly perfect.
Sure.
The reason why it won't be perfect is because, again, the NAV of the fund is using a 24-hour VWAP of the major Bitcoin exchanges rather than just looking at one spot price on one given exchange that may be different from all the other exchanges globally. GBTC, on the other hand, is something that, again, we don't have control over. But oftentimes when the Bitcoin price is on the move to the upside or on the move to the downside, the fund will usually mimic those same movements. But obviously keeping in mind the premium differential baked into that as well.
So this is the first investment vehicle, basically, but more are coming. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the idea, again, going back to Grayscale and what it's all about, is that we would like to create and do intend to create a family of products. If you look at other fund families, maybe it's Wisdom Tree, maybe it's Franklin Templeton, et cetera. These companies have done a fantastic job of establishing a trustworthy and known parent brand, and then have brought to market a whole family of products underneath that brand that give investors access to a specific market. In the case of a company like Wisdom Tree, oftentimes the funds that they have brought to market revolve around certain geographies and gaining exposure to companies in those geographies. Maybe it's a Chinese ETF or an Indian ETF or whatever it may be. In our case at Grayscale, our idea is to bring products to market that allow people to invest in digital currency. So having the first long-only Bitcoin fund is a gigantic step for investing in the space, but we'd like to roll out a whole other series of products that allow people or give people the ability to get exposure to the space.
Any thoughts on what you guys are thinking is coming down the road, or?
I think that we have probably a running list of 20 or 30 products that we are excited about and would love to bring out. I think that given where Bitcoin is and how much educational work we already do to get people excited and on board with Bitcoin and look to commit capital to this fund at the moment, it's more a question of when investors are ready for the next product or the next 2 or 3 products. So it's hard to say how long that roadmap is, being pushed out on the calendar, but we're constantly, surveying our existing investor base and, prospective investors about what types of products or things that they'd look to commit capital to.
Okay, so no hints of what could be coming?
No, there, I think, are a lot of obvious ones out there.
Obvious to you, not to me.
I think that there is the potential for a variety of different products. If you look at other products that are out in the market that are proxies for different underlying assets, be them leveraged or income or inverse or whatever it may be, or baskets of different ideas, I think those are some of the themes that we would look to build products around.
Leveraged or baskets? What would a theoretical basket be of cryptocurrencies or?
Perhaps, yes. That is a possibility, sure.
That's something I've always thought was interesting. I did my altcoin dabbling, a year or so ago, and I think pretty much everything I bought tanked. So hard to keep up on all the different projects and have a clue. And a managed altcoin fund, I think, would be interesting.
That's exactly the kind of feedback we look for.
Great. Well, is there anything else you feel like talking about regarding Grayscale?
I would just kind of put out there to anyone listening to this to come to us as a resource as you explore the space. I think that between the portfolio of companies that Digital Currency Group has gotten involved with in the two wholly owned subsidiaries, our trading business Genesis and our asset management business Grayscale, I think that we collectively as a firm are squarely at the center of the digital currency ecosystem that is unfolding and developing every single day. And I think that as we have conversations with various entities and individuals, be them investors, venture capitalists, banks, broker dealers, payment companies, whatever they may be, we are always fielding all different types of questions and inquiries, and how may this affect existing businesses or existing services, and where might this give rise to new industries, new businesses, new services. And as people explore the space, this is often not a read it once and kind of understand everything about it. This is an iterative process and something that people more often than not have to approach several times before they kind of have that either aha moment or they can really grasp what the potential is here. So something that we are always happy to do is work with individuals and entities, whoever it may be, on educating them about the space and being a resource for them as they explore the space. So I, again, implore anyone listening to this to come to us with any of those questions.
And how would they reach out to you?
One of the best ways to get to us is to shoot us an email. You can either go to the Grayscale website, which is www.grayscale, which is grayscale.co.co, and they can drop their information into one of our forms on the site. They're equally welcome to email us at info@grayscale.co, and someone from the team will be happy to follow up with them as well.
You really mean anybody? You're not just looking to talk to the accredited investors?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we are, of course, always raising assets for the fund and always eager to talk to investors. But this is a technology, currency, commodity. It's a topic that spans many existing fields and industries. So there are going to be a whole host of people with varied backgrounds who are going to have questions about this. And if we're really to see it succeed and really, again, fulfill its potential, there's a lot more educating to do than just around investors. It's a whole host of people.
Is there anything else you feel like talking about?
I would just kind of say at a high level that I've never been more excited about being involved in this space. I think that just from my own experience, and there are people who will probably listen to this who've been in the space longer than I have, that so much has happened in the last year and a half plus that I've been involved in terms of regulation, again, that human capital shift and how many people are leaving Wall Street and, kind of large institutions and moving into the space. And as we continue to see both that movement as well as these, for the most part, kind of stodgy and slow moving and kind of storied institutions getting involved in the space, it continues to affirm, my belief in Bitcoin's potential and kind of what we're all doing in the space to really turn the financial services system upside down and, make something that is far more efficient, far, quicker, and far less costly. And I think that, bridging that gap and again, bringing financial services to the masses is going to be huge. And I think Bitcoin, that's just one use case for it. I think that as we encounter other businesses that are doing things with Bitcoin and blockchain, I just am still amazed by the number of entrepreneurs out there that are staking their own personal reputations and oftentimes personal capital into these companies because they believe so strongly in what they're doing. And I think you're going to start seeing some really, really innovative ideas coming out around digitizing all different types of assets, be it real estate or stocks and bonds, things like escrow and other industries where there are intermediaries and fees and all kinds of things that slow down processes and make them more costly, stand to be disrupted. And I think that, this kind of generation, this group of individuals and companies that's building this infrastructure now really stands to change the face of a lot of existing channels today. So very, very exciting time to be involved in the space.
And I know this will just probably be a speculative answer if you want to give it, but with so much capital, human capital, and just seems like movement with the whole financial ecosystem moving toward Bitcoin, and why do you think the price doesn't seem to be reflecting so much that I would think the price would be soaring right now?
It's definitely a good question. I think that there is a variety of factors that have kind of pushed the Bitcoin price down over the past year. There's been fear and speculation around China banning Bitcoin, Russia banning Bitcoin. There have been some, bad actors or bad entities within the space that have kind of gotten weeded out, but have certainly contributed to some negative headlines. And I think Bitcoin largely is subject to that headline risk. I think if you kind of put price aside, every other metric around the space is up and to the right, whether it's the number of people using it, the adoption, the usage, et cetera. And I think that it will, see price movements in the coming months and coming years that hopefully will be to the upside. I think that there are increasing schools of thought that are developing around why people should be or are investing in Bitcoin. And I'm happy to give you one of them, which is thinking about Bitcoin as digital gold. If you're a historic gold investor, you're probably pretty frustrated these days, just kind of given gold's price movement or even the gold miners' price movement in the public markets. And if you think about Bitcoin and you kind of think about its attributes and you compare them to gold, there's a lot of overlap there. These are both scarce assets, right? There's a finite amount of Bitcoin out there and a finite amount of Bitcoin that'll ever be created. And same goes for gold. We continue to mine gold out of the earth, but in theory, there's a finite amount of it out there. Like gold and its divisibility, Bitcoin too is divisible, out to 8 decimal places. And I think where there starts to be a little bit of difference between Bitcoin and gold is that gold really doesn't have much in the way of utility, whereas Bitcoin does. And Bitcoin can be used to pay for products and services at literally hundreds of thousands of merchants, be them Expedia and Dell and Overstock or whichever company it is that's currently accepting Bitcoin. Whereas you couldn't walk into a hotel with an Expedia reservation and drop a brick bar on the hotel desk and try and pay for a hotel room. So I think that the price movement will happen. When is obviously unknown, but I think that you're starting to see a lot of people starting to think about investing in the space for reasons like I just mentioned.
Yeah, well, I certainly agree too with the comparisons you made with gold.
As a final note, I'd say that investing in Bitcoin obviously doesn't come without its risks. So I would always just tell people, buyer beware. And like any investment, don't commit more than you're comfortable with.
I certainly never tell anyone to buy Bitcoin, but if they're interested in Bitcoin, I'll certainly try to help them understand how to do it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. This was great.
Thanks so much for talking with me. Bitcoin. So, how many of you are accredited investors? Based on Grayscale's first quarter financials, the total number of Bitcoin investment trust shares sold was approximately 1.41 million. This equates to about 141,000 Bitcoins. At today's exchange rate of $265 per Bitcoin, the trust's Bitcoin holdings are valued at over $37 million. Would you buy shares of the Bitcoin Investment Trust? Please let me know what you think by commenting in the show notes for this episode on letstalkbitcoin.com. Thanks for listening to episode 23 of The Bitcoin Game. You'd make me one happy podcast host if you'd follow me on Twitter at the BTC Game. You can find a listing of all the Bitcoin Game episodes at thebitcoingame.com. See you next time.